Hi, everyone. We are starting off today with a story from a woman hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains who was pursued by a creature so heinous she almost vomited on the trail. Then we hear stories from eyewitnesses whose lives were affected to the point that they are unsure of their sanity. In the meantime, did you know that my current stats show that 81% of you who listen still need to hop on board and click that subscribe button? I'd love for you to jump on the bandwagon and help me get that percentage down. I'll be watching. Great. Now let's get into the stories. The story I'd like to share with you here took place in North Carolina in 2021. However, I'm currently living in and writing this to you from southern West Virginia, which is also where I was living when this happened. The weekend in question, or rather the weekend this happened, I had headed south to the area of the Great Smoky Mountains for a solo camping trip. It was an area I had sort of found on my own, and it has great hiking there too. Stuff was happening for me personally at this time in my life, and I needed to be alone to get away from some things and clear my head. Also, I seriously needed the fresh air after being basically cooped up for the last 2 years or so. You know, that COVID thing. So I drove down Friday night and had an uneventful first evening setting up camp, and I headed to bed early. I wanted to get up early, which I did the next morning, and then didn't waste any time heading out, since I wanted to beat most of the midday heat of summer. All was good for a while until I was hiking up this steep trail and huffing and puffing by the top. So I stopped to catch my breath, and I saw this off-leash dog way off in the distance, which irritated me. At first, nothing strange really registered with me about it other than it being off-leash. But it was coming my way, and as it got closer, I became aware of how large it was, much larger than any other dog. And now it was moving along using only its back legs, I realized. It also had reddish-brown fur and was massive, easily the size of a bear, but by the way it was standing, I was totally confused. I looked around to see if anyone else was on the trail, but I was the only one there. It was just me and this creature standing on this mountain trail in the middle of nowhere. Nobody. No help. Nothing anywhere in sight. Fear started to set in as I began to realize that this could be a dangerous situation. I mean, I didn't know what this creature was, and I had no idea if it would attack me. I was terrified, not knowing what it was going to do or what was going on. I mean, no one else was there, so this thing apparently didn't belong to anyone. And the fear started creeping into my mind of all the things that could possibly happen. But I stood my ground. I didn't flinch, hoping that if I didn't make any movement, it would just go away. Now, don't think I was being brave by doing this. I actually couldn't have moved at all, even if I had wanted to, basically out of fear. And soon this thing was nearly right next to me. I remember thinking that this is it. I was going to die, that it was going to kill me. But then it stopped just a few feet away and simply looked at me. Well, stared at me is more like it. I was looking into its piercing eyes, and I swear it was talking to me with them. In that moment, I knew it could think, just like I can. I just knew it. I could sense it. And also, now it didn't seem mad, just curious. Like the way a dog would come running up to you frantically, and then just stop and look at you. And then just like that, it turned around and walked away. But it didn't retreat on the trail. It left the trail and it headed out, where I soon lost sight of it. And that's when my other senses kicked in, and now I could smell it too. It smelled like sulfur, and the smell came rushing in so strongly that I had to choke back vomiting right there on the trail. I sat down for a while right in the middle of the trail to catch my breath and tried to make sense of what had just happened. My head was exploding, and I must have looked insane at that point to somebody if they would have seen me. But I just kept thinking how this dog creature, but not a real dog by any stretch, some wild creature, had just walked up to me and looked right at me like it knew me, like we were friends or something. It was more than obvious to me that this creature actually could have easily killed me, yet it didn't even seem at all like it wanted to do that. I think it just wanted to see me up close or something, check me out. Even though I can't remember every second of it, I still can't get it out of my head. It comes back to me in waves, like flashbacks, often when I least expect it. The whole encounter probably only lasted a minute or two, but looking back on it, it felt like it happened in slow motion, taking forever. And in some ways, I even find myself doubting that it actually happened. So right afterwards, I ended up taking a huge drink of water, basically skeptical of my own eyes and thinking that maybe I had hallucinated due to dehydration. After that, I turned around and headed back to the campsite, fixed lunch, and sat there a bit, sort of stunned, probably in shock. But in the end, I decided not to stay another night, and I packed up and headed straight back home. I still can't say for sure what the creature wanted, why it was there, what it even was. All I know is that I'm still alive to tell the tale, which means it wasn't mad or angry. Either way, I'm just glad it didn't kill me. That would have been the end of my story, but instead, I lived to tell the tale. This was back in the early 2000s when I would go and visit my uncle and grandfather, and my uncle would take me on rides on his motorcycle out in the backcountry. They lived out in Minnesota and had miles upon miles of beautiful backcountry roads that were sparsely traveled, which made them great for riding around on a motorcycle. I have so many fond memories of me and my uncle going riding for 30 minutes to an hour in the evenings, just enjoying the wind blowing against your face. There were several times that we saw a few bull elks here and there. That was pretty cool to see. I saw more deer more times than I can count, but I figured that's usual for being out and about in the countryside. However, that was all ruined for me one night when my uncle decided to take me on a night motorcycle ride. He had never taken me during the nighttime, so I was ecstatic for the adventure. Plus, he told me he was going to take me a different route than he normally does. This excited me even more so. I should probably mention that I was only about 9 years old at the time, so I was still very young and very impressionable. We got on his bike and were heading off. He starts to take us down some roads that I wasn't too familiar with, and they trailed off and forked off of our usual routes. I was having the time of my life, even though there were hardly, if any, streetlights around because, hey, we're in the backcountry. It was darker than dark, but I felt safe with my uncle. It's hard to say how long we were riding before it happened. But at some point down one of the roads, my uncle and I turned our attention to this loud crashing sound to the right of the road, just as we were passing it. It sounded like one of those Tomcat construction work machines that people would drive around. It was so loud. And I remember thinking, is construction going on right now, this late at night? Just as we were passing, and I promise you on this, and I don't want you to think I'm crazy, the trees open up and this large demon thing bolts out on all fours and begins sprinting after us on our motorcycle. I am screaming bloody murder, and my uncle kicks it into high gear, and we go soaring down the road. Of course, I was behind him, so I really had no idea how fast we were going. But if I had to guess, maybe 80 or 90 miles an hour? Whatever was chasing us was keeping up with us and was slowly inching closer and closer. I don't know what the hell it was, but the closest comparison I can make is if you've ever seen the Van Helsing movie. I think it came out in 2003. At the very end, he fights off Dracula and turns into this massive, monstrous, wolf-looking creature. What I saw looked very similar in size and stature to that. The face was very similar to a giant snout filled with crocodilian teeth. It had a sort of dog glow in the eyes, kind of like a red-orange color. It looked to me like somebody crossed a crocodile and a wolf with a splash of a human and a demon. The thing was hulking in size and dwarfed not only me, but my uncle and the bike. If I had to guess, I would say it was around 7 feet tall on all fours with a head as big as my uncle's, or so it seemed. It chased us for a minute and then got extremely close to the bike, like it was going to reach out and grab us, but then it just jumped right off into the woods and vanished just like that. I was still screaming and hysterical until we got back to his house. What happened that night was one of the most traumatic things to have happened in my life. I had to undergo therapy for a while, and it really messed me up, seeing something like that. I think my uncle even gave up on his motorcycle license for a while, but I didn't really talk to him about it or knew how he felt. After that, I didn't ride with him on his bike anymore, and I kind of shut down for a while. I stopped going over there. And a few years later, I would come to find out that my uncle had a massive heart attack. It's a shame because I was close with him at the time. I guess I should have found out how he's come to terms with everything, but I guess I'll just never know. I just wish I knew what it was. I don't think it was any known animal that I've ever seen or heard of. And when I say hulking and demonic looking, I mean it. This thing came straight out of hell, and you could just feel the evil emanating off of it. I've never felt such fear in my life. I also think that part of it was due to the fact that I believe it was toying with us. This thing was so massive, it could have caught up to us and ripped us both off the bike and eaten us right there, as if to keep up with us, and acted like it wasn't even breaking a sweat or trying to keep close. It's almost as if it just wanted to let us know that it could get us at any time it wanted and that we were helpless. I can't shake those feelings. I don't know what you want to call it, whatever it is I encountered that night, but I will tell you it was evil, and I don't wish that for anybody, ever. It was late October 2017, close to Halloween, and I was living in New Hampshire at the time. Some friends and I decided to go to one of those big city Halloween parties, except we later figured out it was for teens. I thought it was going to be lame like all the other parties I had been to in the past. Boy, I couldn't have been more wrong if I had tried. That Halloween night will stay with me for the rest of my life. My costume was pretty uncool, but my mom had made it for me, and I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I wore it anyway. My friends were all dressed in way better costumes, but oh well. We were all ready to kick back and have some fun for the rest of the evening. There was just one catch, though. We had to cut through a notoriously creepy cemetery to get to the party. It seemed to stretch on for miles. To me, it looked like a sea of endless tombstones. I really appreciated the eerie atmosphere, though. It was perfect for Halloween. My friends were all striking poses in front of creepy old granite mausoleums and tombstones. The place looked really old. They all waved to me to join them in their photo shoot, but my eyes were fixed on something entirely different. And that's when things got really weird. Peering out from the shadows beyond the mausoleum, I could see 2 dots, bright yellow dots. And they were eyes. It was as if they were beckoning me. Curiously and almost in a trance, I started past my friends and continued to get closer. As I got closer, I could make out a snout and gray fur. A low, guttural growl came from the smoky gray muzzle. It didn't sound like malice, it was more like restless discontentment. Its head slowly peeked out from the shadows, and then under the bright moonlight I could see it much more clearly. Its body was covered in fur from head to collarbone. The upper torso was completely human, yet almost triangular in build, with its massive, muscular arms that seemed to thin out right down to the waist. From there, the body became canine again. Its long and fluffy tail stood straight up behind it. I think it was trying to decide if I was friend or enemy. I held out my hand, thinking it was some kind of a dog, and I took a few steps towards it, but stopped just as quickly. And then, under better lighting, I could see the bits of medium brown fur hidden with the gray-black. It was actually beautiful, and part of me wanted to touch it. Those mysterious eyes were captivating, wild, kind of like a wolf, but curious and gentle like a dog. I know it's weird, but I like things that are strange and unusual. I started towards it again, but this time more slowly. The creature came towards me a few steps, and I could see the reflection of the moon on its wet nose, but I wasn't afraid. I was thinking that if it were vicious, it would have already attacked me. Suddenly, my boyfriend motioned to me with his arm and called me over to rejoin the group. I gasped at the sound of his voice. It must have startled the creature, too, because it froze in place. Its ear twitched briefly, and then it turned and rushed back into the shelter of the forest. It was so weird, but it was beautiful. It belonged to nature. It didn't belong with us. People might turn it into some sort of strange experiment or something, and I was relieved that it ran off. I wondered if there were any others like it. I mean, there had to have been for one to exist. I thought about it for the rest of the night. The whole thing was totally amazing. How many people get to see something like that? Not many. I remember the moon was incredibly bright that night. As my friends and I continued on our way, I thought I saw a familiar black and brown tail in the trees, and I squinted after it, but even with glasses, I couldn't make it out. That was the last time I ever saw this creature, the one and only time. Later on, I told my friends about what I had seen. My boyfriend thought I was just imagining things. My friends all thought I was being dramatic to set the mood for spooky Halloween fun. But one thing is for sure, I will never forget those wild yellow eyes.